Welcome, this is Magnus, and today I wanted to run a quick test on HDR video recording on a Canon 5D Mark IV, and I also wanted to compare with Magic Lantern's version of HDR recording on my Canon 6D from a couple years ago. I want to see how the difference is and basically how it works. Now, to me, what I've learned from Canon is Canon alternates their ISO levels and records a frame in one ISO and another ISO and then combines the footage for the HDR recording. That's the logic that Magic Lantern used when they applied their HDR recording on the Canon 6D and other Canon models. So I'm going to test out the difference here and see what it's like. I just activated both cameras for HDR recording, but this will be my first time, so I'm just going to do my own thing here, let this camera run as I try to figure out exactly how to run it. Now I'm going to have the cameras pointed at the door, and it's a bright sunny day out, but I've left it a little bit darker in here so that we can see the advantages of the HDR recording. Here I go. Now, first camera I'm going to turn on is the 5D Mark IV. I've got HDR on. Now the settings that it showed me for the HDR recording didn't really tell me anything having to do with different ISO levels. Now I'm going to turn on the Canon 6D. Now the interesting thing about the 6D is that in Magic Lantern software, it alternates the ISO levels on the screen so you can see both ISO levels and make adjustments as necessary if you want to do it. So the screen just flashes, which is an interesting advantage so that you can pretty much know how it's going to work out for you. On both cameras, I've got the HDR activated and recorded, and I'm going to see how it runs. Now I'm heading towards the door right now, and I'm basically going to open it. See if you can still see me or make out anything outside. I'll walk out and then I'll walk in. Pretty much if you can see detail outside and inside, then I know it's working. And if not, then, you know, we'll see what adjustments I have to make before you can clearly make out details outside and in. Let me stop both cameras. Let's get to work here. Stopping this, and we'll see what happens. Here I am at the computer. Now I transferred the HDR files from each of the cameras, the Canon and the 5D Mark IV. Now, when it comes to the Canon itself, I had to use Magic Lantern software in order for it to simulate HDR footage. Now, in order for that to work, I then have to run a program that takes all of the frames in HDR and creates a JPEG. And then in Adobe Premiere, which you'll see here, puts the JPEG into a sort of timeline. And then that timeline, I could just output that into HDR footage. So I made a color and a black and white little output. And then that output I put in the 6D footage. So here you go. Here you can see my footage where, you know, I walked in and out. Now I'll talk about the 6D footage first, and then I'll head over to the 5D Mark IV. So what I noticed in the HDR footage is that when I open the door, I mean, there's a real kind of ghosting effect and a weird odd color defect in this part of the video when I start to record. So it just kind of looks weird. I don't particularly like the way HDR was activated in this one session. I was thinking if I'm filming some sort of production where I need someone to be outside the door but be able to see someone inside and outside, that you could see their face and some details in the background and see everything in the foreground as well. But in this particular instance, at least using this camera, motion seemed okay. I mean, I had the camera on the tripod and I didn't see too much ghosting, but in itself, quality is pretty poor. And then when I shut the door, everything gets really dark. So you can't see what's outside these two windows either. So I didn't particularly like that. I even took out the color just to see what it would look like in black and white, to see if anything's usable. And I do like the way that black and white footage looks a bit more on this than color, but that's just my personal preference. So all in all, not a fan of HDR, but at least it was somewhat usable off the Canon 6D. Again, it was with Magic Lantern software, and it's quite cumbersome to combine the footage. It takes some time in order to do that. It's not something that the camera does out of the body itself. So moving on to the 5D Mark IV and its HDR footage, that is a little bit confusing to me. This is me walking out and walking back in. I don't see any benefit to turning on HDR mode. I can barely make out anything outside. I mean, I even did a couple of takes, adjusted the ISO levels, and as you can see here, I'm not sure if it really does anything effective. I mean, once I close the door, it's unbelievably dark. You can still see footage outside, but it's nothing that's really too usable, at least from that standpoint. And this one, I had the ISO a little bit higher, lost focus a bunch of times, and it's just, like I said, you couldn't see outside, you know, and that's pretty disturbing. So I went online and I pulled, you know, the manual for the 5D Mark IV to see if there's anything that I'm missing, if I can choose different levels of ISO, like a low and a high ISO, so that I can properly do the HDR recording, just like the Magic Lantern software does on the 6D. But unfortunately, it doesn't really explain much. It tells you how to turn on HDR mode, and once you have it on, it just tells you a lot of limitations that HDR mode has and what you have to look out for, and recommending you use a tripod and things that can happen when you are using it. But then it just moves on to the next shooting time lapse. So I'm not too sure if I'm missing something, if there's a way to adjust that. But as of right now, HDR mode looks completely unusable on the 5D Mark IV. Again, that could be an education thing. If anyone has a comment as to how I can possibly use it, just tell me in the comments below, and I would very much appreciate it to run another test basically and see if it's actually worth it. But if not, you know, final conclusion, HDR mode, not a mode that I can see myself using at all, if ever. Well, after testing, it looks like that mode, to me at least, is completely unusable. I don't think I'll be using it, and again, there's an educational lesson or two that I have to learn with the 5D Mark IV in order to use it correctly. You know, maybe next time, you know, if ever a situation, I might lean towards it, but I doubt that I ever will. But I figured I'd show you guys what that's like. You can leave me comments below what you thought or what's next that you'd like to see from me, and I'd definitely explore it and see what I can do. And as always, you can make my day if you subscribe today. This is Magnus, and I'm out. It's a little dark here just because I've been working on this stuff for like half the day. So anyway, see you later.